Mr Chairman, this bill is fundamentally flawed and should not pass.
I'm going to call Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's my pleasure to talk on, speak to the provisions which, starting from Part 9, specifically set out how social housing providers are really being brought into the state housing landscape. And I want to start with the beginning of Part 9, which sets out the provisions around the, quote, social housing agency. Now, when you read, interesting, when you read this section of the bill, it's very ambiguous. It kind of sets out the criteria of how the social housing agency will conduct its duties, what it will be governed by, how it's able to be changed out through essentially order in council. What we're actually talking about, though, is the way that MSD will operate as the social housing agency. That's what it's specifically referring to. So it's interesting to me that these provisions are shaped in the way they are. And I'd be interested to hear from the Minister whether or not they've purposefully done that in order to allow the government some flexibility in future for another agency to take back these powers of essentially overseeing the all of the assessment, additional frequent assessment that will now sit around this area. And I take, for example, Clause 101, Social Housing Agency. It says, the Governor-General may from time to time, by order in council made on the recommendation of the joint ministers, appoint a departmental agency or a Crown entity or any combination of one or more departments, departmental agencies or Crown entities to perform some or all of the functions and exercise some or all of the powers of the agency under this part. Really a lot of wriggle room built in there, and I just wondered if the Minister could give some explanation as to why he felt that was important, because the provisions for the functions of that agency are quite broad, but they are significant. It is the most a powerful part of the bill, is the handing over of the charge, as it were, to that agency. So why so broad? Why not be specific? Why should we not come back to this House to debate the way that that should be governed in future, if indeed the Minister decides to change those that agency? Then we come into, Mr Chair, the bits that relate specifically from Section 105 to social housing providers. Now, in New Zealand, social housing providers have played an incredibly important role in our communities. They have frequently, there are two specific functions I want to speak to, which I think that they have guarded heavily. The ability to provide housing to groups that are not specifically catered for, and tenants who often have particular difficulties being housed. Now, we could place in those categories, for instance, prisoners on release, mental health patients often on release as well from state institutions, those who have experienced severe drug and alcohol issues and have gone through particular programs. There's a range of clients, even those transitioning from night shelter environments into housing. There are a range of clients which community housing providers specifically have catered for in the past. So that has been something very, very special and important that they have done. The second thing that they have done is, of course, they have managed themselves. So that's enabled them to put wraparound services often around this client group, and they also advocate on their behalf. Now, my concern, Mr Chair and Minister, is that by transitioning some of, it's absolutely beneficial to allow those agencies to claim income-related rents in order for their purposes of housing provision. But that then does place some duties on them as well. And I guess I'm trying to see whether or not that dilutes their ability to maintain those really important functions. For instance, the agency, presumably MSD, is to notify social housing providers of eligibility and housing needs. So MSD has to notify the provider each time the agency makes an assessment around the eligibility or continued eligibility of the tenant for social housing. Does that mean if MSD does a reassessment and finds, or there's an income-related rent assessment and finds that a tenant is no longer eligible, is there an expectation then that that community housing provider moves that individual on, given that they are catering for individuals with quite specific needs? Because, Mr. Chair,
Senator Ardern. The Honourable
I had
Dr.
more-
Mix.
Mr. Chairman, this part of the bill